لا مش هاي. هيك خلاص هيك بصدر. صباح الخير. هاي زين. لازم لوريت بصدر. طب as hello, I would like to begin my talk by expressing my deep gratitude to the organizers of this important conference, especially given the critical political situation of unfolding in Palestine, Israel. This opportunity This opportunity, it's important to come together and discuss the pressing issues of Israeli-Palestinian case should not be taken for granted. I'm grateful to be thinking amongst you all, but it's challenging to talk today after witnessing the pictures of the assassinated children from Gaza. You will notice that I will be speaking in English today, صح? You already noticed. I believe that language plays a critical role in shaping our thinking about the binational existence, especially if we are striving towards a paradigm transformation. In light of the binational and bilingual space that we are seeking to create, I believe that it would be valuable to include Arabic as a main language in future conference proceedings, especially as the sponsoring institution Van Leer facilitate the wonderful project Maktub. I will proceed in English today in hopes it will allow all to understand. And I am not in my best today physically, so sorry for that. The talk discusses Palestinian situatedness in Israel to understand the ways they have been at the forefront of Palestinian communities, proposing possibilities for the deconstruction of the colonial power relations, and how their positionality enables the contemplation on a transformed position of the Israeli Jewish colonizer and the Israeli society. I will examine some of the ways they have continued to suggest an alternative relationship between colonizer and colonized, even despite the oppressive state apparatus that dominates them to decolonize Palestine. I want to begin briefly by acknowledging the precarious situation we find ourselves in these days. To witness the upheaval of this critical juncture as a Palestinian in Israel is to behold the anatomies of a disjunctured settler state. It's to be told that political protest and civil disobedience are now legitimate, so long as their goal is the maintenance of what had been a status quo deleterious to some, but not others. It's to observe the largest mass mobilization centered on the nature of the Israeli state regime. It's to witness a sea change in academic organizing and claims to objectivity. In fact, the university can and should take a position. Its members should prioritize political action. And the scholar's legitimate duty is to become a public intellectual who guides the civil sphere of the ledge. It's to observe the workings of new social expectations for conspicuous participation. It's to watch the largest mobilizations taking shape among many who have long remained silent, and yet to simultaneously wonder to what end. It's worth asking, what is the nature of the crisis that has emerged For the majority of those protesting, the crisis boils down to a right-wing redistribution of power from the judicial branch. The ruling coalition ostensible coup would empower the despotic rule of a man under criminal indictment whose actions resemble fellow authoritarian elites and who seeks to institutionalize his own dominance, as well as his populist, religious, patriarchal, homophobic, and violence-inciting coalition members who wish to remake the fabric of Israeli social life. It also threatens the long-standing political and economic privileges of a class of secular Jewish Israelis who risk the loss of their power. The hegemonic viewpoint among the majority of Israeli protesters occludes the underlying, long-standing crisis, and of course excluding the important role of the groups demonstrating against occupation and apartheid. That is, that despite the particular figures holding political power in Israel at any given time, the state apparatus is designed so as to preserve the supremacy of one ethno-national group over others, including the fractured indigenous national population. Many protesting fail to connect the rise of authoritarian power and of the corruption to the history of the colonial settlement, institutionalized social control, and the hierarchization that has shaped who has access to resources, power, and indeed a good life. But this is not only a failure in consciousness. Many among the protesters are also the ones who have long created, legitimized, took part in and upheld the system of the rule that has preserved violent stratification between the Mediterranean Sea and Jordan River. Vanguard activists ostensibly reject the redistribution of political power to more rapacious settlers who are forthright in their territorial and supremacist demands, meanwhile lamenting the loss of a Jewish democracy, one based on ethno-racial supremacy and bureaucratized violence. Juxtaposed Arendt noted that here I'm juxtaposing two moments. Arendt noted that the gap between European citizens and colonial subjects corrupted liberal democracy in Europe. In a sense, she warned in her tethering of totalitarianism to imperialism. The practices employed overseas came back to haunt the metropole. Transposing this dynamic to the Israeli case begins to address the aggrandizement of the settler right and the erosion of civil rights within Israel. Undemocratic practices are being turned back inward, although they had been in place for those Palestinians in general and specifically in Israel. We can take the most recent events in Israeli politics as the culmination of much longer processes without being overly teleological or functionalist, and without taking the present political transformation to have been absolutely inevitable. Instead, to understand how coloniality structures governmentality is to acknowledge the dependencies of institutional norms and structures that were built to preserve one type of Jewish power while suppressing other forms. How is it that we can come to a new understanding given the great dissonance, to borrow from Ramier, that plagues our basic understandings of what this conflict is about? I'll shift now to discuss the paradigm of settler colonialism before returning to the current events. The settler colonial paradigm is not an orderly or monolithic theory. Rather, it's an interpretative framework of historical analogies and comparisons, one that enables the examination of a series of societies shaped as settler societies from the early modern period until today. While specific settler colonial practices differ from society to society, the outcomes of the settler colonial processes are often commensurable, especially given the focus on land expropriation. I need not to explain to this audience the intricacies of settler colonialism as structured disposition. I will say, though, that settler colonialism, as an analytic in sociology, seeks to focus on the relations dynamics of settlers interacting with indigenous inhabitants and on the institutionalization of settlers' privileges vis-à-vis the native in settler colonial colony and state. The re-emergence, although there is no time now to talk about the re-emergence because this paradigm has been discussed in the study of Israel-Palestine, the re-emergence of the settler colonial paradigm in the social sciences and humanities in Israel can be ascribed in large part to political processes within Palestinian society in Israel in the mid-90s. Specifically, addition to political discourse from one that promotes a two-state solution to one that envisages a state for all of its citizens and the return of history to the public sphere. This shift challenges the Jewish character of the Israeli state, calling for democratization based on inclusion and equal rights for all, and includes public calls for the right of return for the Palestinian refugees, invoking the history of the Nakba. While critical post-colonial researchers typically frame the colonial situation in Israel as historical in nature rather than as an ongoing process continuing into the present, focusing mainly on the Zionist movement, the newer phase of research is characterized by the return of Palestinians to history, not only as victims, but also as agents of this enduring history. Central to this paradigm change is what I call the phenomenology of relations between Palestinians in Israel and the Israeli society. Despite the settler structure and the enduring hostility within the state, which is expressed especially explicitly during times of crisis, Palestinian and Jewish society in Israel have nonetheless developed social connections. A phenomenological analysis of the encounter between the two societies unveils the complexity of their relationship, which is interwoven with multiple contradictions and also outlines the theoretical possibilities for decolonization and anti-colonial existence. In other words, the development of the settler colonial paradigm is crucial not only in reflecting the political reality, but also in considering possibilities not bound to political hegemony. Since settler colonialism captures both the settlers and the natives in their hierarchical relationships, the sociology of knowledge offers possibility for the deconstruction of such relationship while illuminating alternative for coexistence. The 1966 military rule and the associated restriction on mobility that were imposed on Palestinian citizens often hindered the development of direct relationship between Palestinians and Jewish Israelis at the start of the settler colonial state. Such relationships slowly began to develop during the 60s with the gradual and partial decrease of supervision at workplace and public spaces, including universities. Social relations between Jewish Israelis and Palestinians have been more common between those who lived in what are known as mixed cities. Although they remain limited in scope, Palestinians and Israel have developed both an external and internal standpoint, socially, culturally, and politically, towards Jewish Israelis through personal, professional, and familiar relationship, and by being part of the social and the political fabric in Israel. The engagement of Palestinians in Israel's political system is, in a limited way, has contributed significantly to shaping their comprehension of the community of the other, a community whose language and culture they know far better than Jewish citizens of Israel know the language and culture of the Palestinian community. The encounter between Palestinian in Israel and Jewish Israelis is markedly different from that between Jewish Israelis and Palestinians in the 1967 occupied Palestinian territories, as the latter is based on military occupation and contentious settler colonial war. The latter is an encounter in most cases that takes place in checkpoints, blockades, and prisons in confrontations with the soldiers and settlers. From the standpoint of these Palestinians, Jewish settlers are first and foremost the enemy and the colonizer. However, the situation is more complicated for Palestinians in Israel, for whom members of the Jewish community may be colleagues, clients, patients, doctors, students, or teachers with whom they interact on a daily basis. In light of this, we can understand why Palestinians in Israel were among the first Palestinians to advance visions of binationalism, proposing an intellectual debate about the possibility of transforming the settlers into natives and using the framework of decolonization to articulate historical options for reconciliation with the binational state modeled as moral and practical framework. I would argue that these propositions reflect the political embeddedness of these Palestinians. The 2000 Haifa Declaration, for instance, written by Palestinian citizens, is a fascinatingly complex document that acknowledges the right of Jews Israelis, not all of the Jews, but the Jewish Israelis, those who live here and now, to self-determination while charting a non-colonial existence in a democratic state. It reads in part, this historic reconciliation also requires us, Palestinians and Arabs, to recognize the right of the Israeli Jewish people to self-determination, to life in peace, dignity, and security with the Palestinians and other peoples of the region. Our vision for the future relations between Palestinian Arabs and the Jewish Israeli in this country is to create a democratic state founded on equality between the two national groups. This solution would guarantee the rights of the two groups in a just and equitable manner. And this is not an easy task. For instance, just like last week, I and those of us that do that was heavily criticized, if understandably, by colleagues in Ramallah. Yesterday, Asad Ghanem related to this too. It's not an easy task to talk about the right to Jewish self-determination in a context when the right presently derives from colonial violence perpetrated by Jewish Israelis without an exception, in different forms. The survey results that we heard yesterday, the survey results that we heard yesterday from Nimrod and Alon, I already engaged the results in my talk today, as you can see, confirm this specific positionality. If you remember, in most of the options that include the living together, what I call the living together, and not separation, and the admitting of rights of the Israeli Jews in this territory, Palestinian citizens were among the majority in comparison to Israelis and other Palestinians, those who have listened yesterday to these results. Therefore, Palestinians can have a role in reinvigorating universalist civil discourse and a non-mutually exclusive nationalism that they have nourished, instantiated, for example, as I mentioned in projects like State for All Citizens, One Democratic States, and etc. Initiating a call to decolonize the political sphere in Israel and in uniting with anti-colonial Jewish Israelis and international groups, encountering not just the Israeli far rights, but the political system of settler colonial state writ large. Given the widespread mobilization and dissent in Israel today, which has too often failed to surface, Palestinians in Israel should take advantage of this opportunity, of this political moment. They possess a particular embeddedness that might produce a new politics. Their second side, if I want to use Dubois terminology, derives from their unique positioning as the sons and the daughters of their homeland. يعني كأصحاب الوطن الأصليين، يعني من محل قوة. They can help rethink the relation between the Jewish and Palestinian questions and the potential for resolving them together. To return now to the present, To return now to the present condition, it's impressive to witness Jewish Israelis, including academic colleagues, mobilizing, and I truly respect mobilizing, as any mobilization is a rare social achievement. The rapid spread of support is also encouraging. However, It's possible that what many are after, albeit unconsciously or implicitly, is the protection of the structural Israeli Jewish privileges and profits long maintained that sustains a hierarchized society in which Palestinians are sequestered to the bottom. My concern is not simply where have they been all the time. وين كانوا? But rather, بس مهم إنه they mobilized. This is important. But rather, to what end mobilization is targeted? And this is my concern. Claiming hypocrisy as normative critique would not explain behavior. I am a sociologist at the end. Understanding people's situatedness and the role of the mechanisms like split consciousness, what I call it, split consciousness of the hegemonic Israelis in shaping thought and action is more sociologically productive. Alongside this consciousness may come a practice of what? Of repression. A process of silencing other kinds of knowledge now, specifically now, including on the roots of the political crisis, by either not engaging with or ignoring the path dependencies initiated by the foundational violence of this settler colonial state. The voices of the dominant may reign supreme, and discussions around new forms of sociality may again be redirected towards social hierarchies and enduring injustices. Still, the demonstration, خلاص هاي آخر فقرة. Still, the demonstration can expose activists to other kind of this is the hope. You can't let me give up on the hope. Still, دقيقة. The demonstrations can expose activists to other kinds of political orientation they may otherwise never encounter to be open to grasping. For instance, more radical contingents protesting against the occupation could be found at many major protests across Israel, although they were small and are small and marginal. And these movements have seen growth or, in the least, increased tolerance. This, then, is a crucial moment, a crucial political moment, in which anti-colonial organizing can diffuse more rapidly and widely. Perhaps the specter of a confiscation of rights will allow Jewish Israelis not only to sympathize with Palestinians who have been long denied equal rights, but will enable forms of collaboration and solidarity. Perhaps also the greater exposure of the Israeli regime to international institutions, media, and social movements will further prompt domestic and international actors to advance decolonization. The question is whether the status quo, Jewish supremacy, becomes even more entrenched. Hawara is just one example that might represent this future. Or a new avenue for decolonization can emerge. Will Zionism see the seeds of its own dissolution? Are the sprouts from which, if nurtured properly and jointly, a new decolonial sociality can blossom strong enough to endure? Thank you.